On Wednesday morning, as per his usual routine, Arkady intended to sleep in until noon. He had a compelling reason for doing so, since he had spent the previous night at a sports bar, fervently cheering for his favorite soccer team, which, unfortunately, suffered a resounding defeat. To console himself, Arkady indulged in exquisite and exorbitantly priced beverages, choosing not to leave the bar. In his current state, Arkady could scarcely recall how his friend Vitalik practically dragged him to his cherished wife's side that morning. Oksana, Arkady's wife, was a true treasure for any man. Deeply enamored with his future spouse, Arkady believed it was this love that granted him certain liberties not afforded to his friends, who were trapped in marital obligations with partners akin to vultures rather than spouses. Take Vitalik, for instance. He was an attractive, well-built man, notwithstanding a slight beer belly. Having been married for a decade, Vitalik worked as a caretaker in a kindergarten. Despite his noble profession, his wife never allowed him to unwind after a demanding day's work, persistently interrupting his soccer matches. Was such behavior acceptable? Certainly, Arkady would never tolerate such treatment from his wife, Oksana. He would promptly remind her of her role as the guardian of the family hearth. Yet fortunately, his wife possessed wisdom and knew precisely how to maintain peace within their household. And today, as she prepared to leave for her nursing job at the hospital, the woman entered the room quietly, carrying a tray filled with delicious treats. She had spent the entire evening preparing them for her husband, hoping he wouldn't come home too late. Gently touching his shoulder, she whispered, "Darling, wake up. I brought you a snack. I know you must have been exhausted yesterday, but I need to talk to you before I leave," she added affectionately, her hand caressing Arkish's backside. Instantly, the man stirred awake, appreciating this tender gesture. However, he felt the need to maintain his image as a strong man in front of his wife, so he put on a disgruntled expression and muttered, "Are you out of your mind? Why are you waking me up? Don't you know I'll be job hunting all day today and need my sleep? I've been to several different companies, but none of them are worthy of someone like me. You know that skilled professionals aren't readily available, and I won't settle for anything less," he finished abruptly. "I apologize, dear. I understand everything, and I'm certainly not pressuring you," she replied. "After all, I have a part-time job, and we have enough money. By the way, I left some on the dresser in case you need it, and it's only been a year since you've been out of work. That's not a long time, honey, but that's not why I woke you up. Mom asked for your help." A group of pigs was scheduled to be brought to the farm where Arkady worked. This was a common occurrence, especially when finances were tight after payday. The news sent a shiver down Arkady's spine, causing him to stumble over his words. He had only met his 58-year-old mother-in-law, Valentina Danilovna, once before, on his wedding day. Valentina had been living abroad for a long time, married to a French farmer. However, it seemed that her longing for her homeland became too strong, prompting her to leave her husband and return to her native country. She bought a pig farm in a neighboring region, determined to start her own business. The mere thought of working in a pigsty with his well-groomed hands made Arkady recoil in horror. He vented his dissatisfaction to his wife, expressing his reluctance to comply with his mother-in-law's request. But how could he refuse her? Over the years of being with her daughter, Valentina had only asked him for one thing. Oksana, his wife, supported her mother's plea with a tender kiss and the promise of something special upon his courageous return. She quickly left to earn money, leaving Arkady to his thoughts. As Arkady devoured his breakfast, he couldn't help but lament the ruined Champions League match for the day. He hurriedly dressed, aware of the considerable distance he had to cover. The bus from the station operated on a strict schedule, and he couldn't afford to miss it. He bundled up in warmer clothes and ventured outside, immersing himself in a winter wonderland of snow and festive New Year's Eve spirit. The city sparkled with vibrant lights, and a magnificent fir tree stood tall in the square. "And you're going to carry pigs," the man mumbled, amused by the absurdity of such a thought. Having reached the train station and hopped onto the correct bus, Arkasha settled into one of its plush seats, comfortably making himself at home. Unbeknownst to him, he soon drifted off into a peaceful slumber. He awoke to the gentle caress on his cheek, accompanied by a whisper, "Wake up, son-in-law. Poor thing has had quite a journey, oversleeping the bus stop. Thankfully, I didn't get confused, or they would have taken my assistant all the way to Moscow." As the new assistant opened his eyes, he saw his mother-in-law leaning over him, her fluffed-up down jacket emphasizing her animated demeanor. The scene triggered a faint recollection, reminiscent of some distant memory from his youth. Arkady felt as though similar instances had occurred before, but the specifics of when and where remained elusive. "Hello, mother," he murmured in response, following her down the narrow aisle of the bus. As he was leaving, a driver who admired him approached and pointed at a massive pickup truck blocking his path. "She's a beast. She saved me from a nasty accident. I almost ended up in a ditch." Valentina, sitting in the car, had been waiting for her son-in-law at the bus stop as they had planned. However, all she saw was a speeding intercity bus that zoomed past her. Without a second thought, she hastily chased after it. When she finally arrived at the lovely cottage, her first priority was to ensure her son-in-law's satisfaction by inviting him to a table filled with an assortment of delectable dishes, with a roasted pig taking center stage. A decanter of homemade grape drink was also placed, from which they both generously helped themselves. After a satisfying meal, the well-fed son-in-law was guided to a cozy living room and instructed to rest on a soft sofa. Meanwhile, the mother-in-law hurried to the courtyard to await the arrival of the pigs in the car. As Arkady settled himself, he noticed an album of old photos resting on the coffee table in front of him. To his astonishment, he was dumbfounded once again as he spotted himself in one of the pictures. The image captured him during his chubby-cheeked high school days. Standing beside him was their homeroom teacher, a fresh graduate from the local university's history department. Even in the black and white photo, her cheeks glowed with a bright blush that couldn't be concealed. And all because the teacher had recently come across a highly explicit note, handed to her by the notorious class bully. Arkasha, completely smitten, had fallen head over heels in love with her at first sight, mesmerized by her alluring curves accentuated by a tight skirt and a white blouse. However, their passionate affair came to an abrupt end after a series of love letters that left the teacher blushing like a scarlet rose. In those days, the potential consequences of such a fiery romance were unimaginable. Our protagonist couldn't shake off his youthful infatuation, and it seemed that fate had a twisted sense of humor, as he found himself drawn to the enticing charms of his mother-in-law. Yet, Arkasha knew better than to entertain forbidden thoughts for too long. Just then, Valentina Danilovna burst into the room, urgently announcing, "My son-in-law is here. We need to hurry. The driver is waiting." Without hesitation, Arkasha grabbed a pen from the table and hastily scribbled a brief note, although he couldn't quite explain why he felt compelled to do so. Perhaps it was just a precaution. With the energy of the possessed, they frantically worked together to transport the piglets to their enclosure. It was a strenuous sight to behold. Valentina Danilovna, wise from her agricultural experience abroad, effortlessly handling 2 squealing piglets at once. Finally, the last piglet was moved and set free in its designated area. As the car drove away, leaving them behind, both mother-in-law and son-in-law collapsed onto a haystack in the corner of the pigsty, catching their breath and embracing the brief respite. They gazed at the glistening Christmas tree across the cozy room, where the kind-hearted woman had decided to create a festive atmosphere, even for pigs. Observing the robust appearance of the farmer, her son-in-law couldn't resist the urge to discreetly pass another note to his former mentor. Initially, the woman was perplexed by the scrap of paper from her son-in-law, but as she read the tender words dedicated to her, A radiant smile spread across her face, unencumbered by moral inhibitions. She felt hesitant to confess her profound affection for her pupil to the teacher, but times had changed. Now, she was merely a mother-in-law, not his instructor, and as everyone knows, a mother-in-law would never encourage anything untoward. Acting on instinct, the woman drew her son-in-law closer, their lips entwined in a passionate kiss, with only the pigs and the Christmas tree as witnesses to this extraordinary Christmas tale. Undoubtedly, this enchanting story would continue, as the mother-in-law's support for the young couple was far from over.